Join the legacy of health restoration May 11th through 13th in Green Bay, Wisconsin. A lineup of dynamic speakers will share tested and proven strategies for clinical results and sustained practice growth. This isn't your average seminar. We have hands-on activities for content retention and connection. Who can attend our event? Chiropractic students, coaching program and non-Wellness Way practitioners, students and graduates of the Wellness Way Academy, and Wellness Way doctors, staff, and spouses. Join us in Green Bay for this immersive training event designed to build your confidence in applying chiropractic philosophy coupled with comprehensive resources for strategic growth. B.J. Palmer started the movement. Dr. Patrick Flynn forged forward. And now the Wellness Way is paving the path for future practitioners to run on. Prepared to join the legacy of great health revolutionaries ready to face the health challenges others can't.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday morning. Welcome to this week's A Different Perspective. So if you're watching or you're listening, you're probably thinking, hey, wait a minute, right? That doesn't sound like Doc. That doesn't look like him. And yes, you're correct, right? I am actually his stunt double with just slightly more hair, right? No, just kidding, right? As it came across earlier, I'm Dr. J. I'm with the Wellness Way. For those of you, right, who don't know me, which is probably most of you, right, out there listening and watching, I'm Dr. J. I'm with the Wellness Way Fond du Lac. And so if you're not from Wisconsin, that's kind of right in the middle between Green Bay and Milwaukee, right, about an hour from each one of them. I've been at that clinic for, I believe, 7 years now, been a part of the Wellness Way ever since I started there, and it has been a great, amazing journey. It's been nothing short of honestly amazing to see how much it's grown over the years I've been there, how many more clinics and docs we've had that joined, and just the impact it's had on people and patients' lives, and really just healthcare in general. And so super excited to be a part of it, super excited to be here today, honestly a little bit honored to be here and doing the show. I've been saying for a while, I like to get on here and try to do a different perspective and share some information with you guys. And if you didn't see in the beginning to the promo, we have one of our Patent Wellness Way seminars coming up, and they're always great to come to. It's, I believe, about a month away, and if you're a doc in the Wellness Way, I encourage you to come, right? If you're interested, you want to learn more about what we do in the Wellness Way, train with us, kind of get a better understanding of the perspective and information that we learn. And also, you know, we always talk about work hard, play hard, have a good time as well. I encourage you to come, check it out, sign up. You will not be disappointed, and you'll learn some things while you're there as well, all right? But the month of April, we're talking about allergies, right? It's our Wellness Way approach to allergies. Dr. Jason set us up last week with some great information, kind of got the ball rolling and kicked things off. And then this week, I'm going to continue on that. I'm going to dive into maybe a couple things that he talked about last week and just go into a little bit more detail and then share some additional things with you guys as well. So with that being said, without further ado, let's kind of roll into our different perspective. All right, and we're back. Still here, no wardrobe change yet, right? That's coming later on. We're gonna switch it up a little bit. But, so our different perspective, part 2 with the allergies. Like I said and I mentioned earlier, Dr. Jason last week did a great job, set the stage for a lot of different kind of bits and pieces when it comes to allergies and why and different parts of them and some understanding. But like I said, I want to dive back into just a couple things that he mentioned last week that I think are very important to understand. And it's a very, I think the first thing I want to talk about really is it's a very common question, statement sometimes rebuttal from people that we get all the time when they talk about, well, there's allergies and then there's hypersensitivities, right? And well, aren't there, they're not the same thing. And my doctor says, well, that those are hypersensitivities and they don't matter and they don't affect my health, but this is a true allergy. Or a lot of times people will just ask, like, what's the difference? And I think I probably speak for most wellness way docs, is it's a very, especially when we start talking about allergies, it's probably the most common question we get. So I kind of want to put that, the nail in the coffin, and kind of put that to rest today and just give you a little bit more information about it, right? So let's look at this right here. So I believe this is from the National Institute of Health. And what it says at the top, right, is hypersensitivity reactions are exaggerated or inappropriate immunological responses occurring in response to an antigen or an allergen. All right, so let's stop right there. Come back here, right? Response to an antigen or an allergen, right? I want to drive that home because when you start to understand hypersensitivities, those reactions happen because you get exposed to an allergen. Now, last week, Dr. Jason talked about what an allergen is, right? It's some foreign protein, right, from our environment that is typically harmless, right, to us. And it can be a food, it can be a pet, an animal, it can be a pollen, dust, whatever, right? But when those foreign proteins get into the system, right, it can stimulate an immune response, right? It binds to certain cells. Those cells then start to release certain antibodies. Those antibodies bind to other cells and it stimulates releases of certain cytokines, the main one being histamine, right? And it's an important kind of clinical pearl. I'm going to probably drop a couple clinical pearls as we go along to understand that histamine is one of the things that creates a lot of the symptoms that we have when we develop these allergy responses. But histamine is a cytokine, which means that it actually helps the immune system communicate, but it's also a neurotransmitter, which means it affects brain health and function, it affects nervous system function. And that's why later on when we talk about these different symptoms, why you can have so many different symptoms that come when you're being exposed to these allergies. And a lot of times when I look at like kids, for example, that are dealing with ADD and ADHD and maybe these higher anxiety and they're 4 or 5 years old, it's like, depending on their home life and things, yes. But most 4 and 5-year-olds don't have a whole lot to be stressed and worried about. And they're having a lot of those symptoms. A big trigger for them can be these allergies because it creates such massive histamine responses. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that and the kind of relation and how that affects the different systems of the body. And it's a big trigger, probably one of the most irritating things to the adrenal glands. It creates those adrenals to have to produce tons of cortisol and cortisone, which then create more stress and more wear and tear and things like that on the body. All right, so let's continue on here with the definition. Type 1, 2, and 3 hypersensitivity reactions are known as immediate hypersensitivity reactions because they occur within 24 hours of exposure to an antigen or an allergen. All right, come back to me again here. All right, so there they go, right? In that first paragraph of that study, right, and information, it says that hypersensitivities happen when we get exposed to an allergen. There's actually 4 types. They talk about 3 here, type 1, 2, and 3, right? And those symptoms happen, right, when you get exposed to the allergen, right? So really when you sit there and you look at and understand is that a hypersensitivity is an allergy and an allergy is a hypersensitivity, right? There's different types of hypersensitivities, but the allergic reaction happens when you get exposed to that allergen. And the type of hypersensitivity it is, as we'll talk about in a minute, is based on the type of cells that are being produced and released. And so a lot of times, people come back and say, well, my doc said there's allergies and there's hypersensitivities, right? I always tell people, if that your doctor, your allergist tell you that, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you might want to find a new doc or allergist because they just don't understand just basic immunology and they haven't done just some simple reading. Because if you pick up any immunological textbook, you look at any immune-based study, any medical-based information, they're going to sit there and tell you straight away, there's 4 different types. Those reactions, those hypersensitivities happen when you get exposed to an allergen, and then you have an allergic reaction, right? So they can really use the term, and they will use it interchangeably, which is why, again, it can be very confusing for a lot of people. But why they do that is because they've kind of been beat over the head to believe there's only one type of those hypersensitivities is an allergy, because it creates a certain response, which we'll talk about, and then they can diagnose you, treat you, right, give you a drug medication to manage that. All right, and let's flip back to this one more time, because I find it interesting. When you look at the top, right, what's it say? Continuing education activity, right? So flip back over here. You know, as doctors, regardless of whatever your degree is in, we have to go through continuing education classes, right, to maintain our license and things. And so again, this is right off the National Institute of Health. It's in their continuing education, you know, curriculum to educate their doctors on understanding different things about allergies. And it says plainly right there, there's different types of hypersensitivities that happen when you get exposed to an allergen, then you develop an allergic reaction, right? They're the same things, it's just the symptoms and the cells and the things that are produced can be different with these different types of hypersensitivities, all right? So hopefully, right, we understand that. Now, looking at allergies, Dr. Jason touched on this last week. Again, there's 4 different types: type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4, right? And we're really gonna talk probably today on mainly type 1, 2, and 3. And why is because of the antibodies that are produced. IgE in type 1, right? That's the classic allergy when you go to your doctor, your allergist, right, that they talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But then we're going to talk about 2 and 3 because they use something called IgGs, right, which also are a huge, huge, huge player when it comes to allergies and allergy reactions and responses. And then type 4, you're looking more at T cells and macrophages. That can be more related to autoimmune conditions and things like that, all right? So we'll pop back over here to this next one. Again, you're not going to hit too much on this. Just Dr. Jason talked on the multiple different types of antibodies that can be produced. Again, the main ones that we'll talk about, IgGs and IgEs today. And so, quick definition, what is an IgE, right? It's an antibody produced by your immune system. If you have an allergy, your immune system overreacts to an allergen by producing antibodies called IgEs. These antibodies travel to cells that release chemicals, causing allergic reaction. This usually causes symptoms in the nose, lungs, throats, and skin. All right, let's pop back here. So, again, right, understanding that hypersensitivities are allergies are hypersensitivities, right? There's 4 main types. The one that we're talking about here is type 1 that use those IgE antibodies. And so, as we'll talk about in a second, the symptoms a lot of times for people are going to be more upper respiratory driven because that's where a lot of those antibodies tend to live. And a lot of those mast cells tend to be in the lungs, the throat, the nose, eyes, ears, right? So when you get those symptoms, or when you come in contact with an allergen that triggers that type of reaction, a lot of times you're going to get those symptoms in the upper respiratory tract. All right, and we'll flip back over here. This is one that when people think about allergies, they always kind of go hand in hand with is that anaphylactic type reaction, right? It's an acute, life-threatening hypersensitivity disorder defined as generalized, rapid, evolving, multisystemic allergic reaction, right? So right there, right, come back to me again, right? What does it say right away in that first sentence, right? It's a hypersensitivity disorder, type 1, right, that when it gets triggered, creates an allergic reaction, right, i.e. allergy, right? So again, that's the main one that your docs and things in the medical world are always going to say, well, this is an allergy and nothing else matters, right? Because as we're going to talk about, it creates a lot of, very quickly, within, you know, minutes to hours of exposure, it creates symptoms. And those symptoms can be mild to severe. And in, yes, some cases, they can be life-threatening, right? But at the end of the day, is they're good to know? Yes, they have an impact on health, but there's other types of allergic reactions that use other forms of antibodies that make up a vast, vast majority of the reactions that we see. And that's why, in my opinion, yes, it's good to know about the IgEs, but we really need to test and look for these IgGs, which we'll talk about in a minute here, because they create such systemic inflammation. They make up so much more of that antibody pool that's circulating in the blood that can create so many other issues. All right, so we'll kind of flip back over here. Anaphylactic reactions, right? They're classified as these IgE mediated, but it also says there's reactions as IgE independent events, right? So again, what does that mean? That just means very simply that you can have these anaphylactic reactions that aren't just related to IgE type allergies as well, right? There's other types of allergic reactions that can create those symptoms. And then it just goes on to say, what are the symptoms you can have? Mild skin flushing, itching, up to severe respiratory symptoms, right? And so, again, that's why when you look at the classical definition of an allergy, they always talk about that type of a response, the anaphylactic, right? The throat swells, face swells, lip swells. I was thinking the movie Hitch, right? When he goes out, I think it's for like sushi or something like that, right? And he's having fun on his date, eating this fish, whatever. And all of a sudden, his date's like, oh my God, like this guy's face is blowing up. We got to go get something, right? Takes him to, I don't know if it's Walgreens or whatever, and he sees his reflection in the mirror, and he freaks out, right? And what do? Right? They get him some Benadryl, right? So again, yes, a lot of times that's what they're gonna equate to as a true allergy because the reactions are very visible. They happen very quickly and they can be life-threatening. But at the same time, now if you have those, right, they can diagnose you, they can treat you, they can give you steroids and drugs and medications and inhalers and sprays. They can sell you and give you an EpiPen, which I'm not saying you shouldn't have and use those things if you have those type of allergies, but just understand that makes up a very small percentage of people. And a lot of people who, when they think they have allergies and they have all those allergic symptoms, they'll go to their doctor or an allergist, talk to them, and they'll do a skin prick test, which again, in my opinion, isn't the best test out there to do to even look for IgE-based allergies. We'll talk about some blood stuff here later on. But more often than not, they get the skin prick test done and like nothing shows up. And they're like, well, what the heck, right? Like, I know I have these allergies. I come in contact with XYZ. I get symptoms, but my doctor's telling me, well, those aren't allergies. They're just hypersensitivities and they don't really matter and you shouldn't have to worry about them and they don't affect your health, right? And unfortunately, they couldn't be further from the truth, right? And one reason why that is, or why that happens when you go and you get tested that way for allergies is this right here. All right, and Dr. Jason touched on this last week as well. But the bottom part where it says, although IgE is typically the least abundant isotype, blood serum, IgE level is normally in individuals are only about 0.05% of the immunoglobulin concentration. All right, back to me here again. Again, right, it blows my mind when you look at medicine and healthcare. They have a whole field, right, of medicine. At, and they only base it off of one thing. They base it off something, an IgE type reaction, which makes up less than 0.05%. I believe Jason last week, his number was 0.03%, right? Tomatoes, whichever one, pick one, right? Either way, it makes up a very, very, very small percentage of those circulating antibodies within our blood, right? You still have the other 99.95 or 97% of the immune system that's floating around in our blood looking for foreign things that don't belong there, that in the medical, they say, well, they acknowledge it, but they just say they don't matter, right? It's not a big deal. It's not going to create any issues, right? So if we flip back here to this, as we keep going, it says right there, compared to 75% for IgGs at 10 milligrams per milliliter, and are the isotopes responsible. So flip back here real quick, isotopes responsible. The other thing about IgGs is there's multiple different subclasses of IgEs, right? There's 4 different subclasses of IgG allergies, or I should say antibodies, that are being produced, and they make up 75% of that circulating pool, right? But they very often, I should say almost always, are overlooked as a contributing factor, or in some cases, the whole reason why you may have a symptom, condition, disease thing going on, all right? And as it says here on the rest of it, right, they're responsible for the classical adaptive immune response. So when you come in contact with anything, whether it's a pollen, a dust, a food, a virus, a bacteria, one thing that's going to happen is your body's going to produce antibodies, right? That's, again, a whole nother story, and that'd be a whole nother topic that we could get into, right, diving into that. But one thing it'll do is produce antibodies, and those IgGs they play a huge role in that response. But it also says it's capable of triggering anaphylaxis as well, right? And so going back to that earlier report on anaphylaxis, and it says how you can have IgE and also IgE independent, right? So these can also create those exact same symptoms, but they're gonna cause much, much more issues as well. And so in our world, in the wellness way, in my world, these are things that I like to know if you have an IgE allergy, but I care way more about the IgGs because they're gonna create so much more long-term damage and destruction and inflammation and chronic stress and histamine and inflammation in the system is gonna set the stage for all these different chronic health conditions that we see today. And in every case, it's going to be a contributing factor. And in some cases, I've seen it firsthand through clinical experience. It's the whole reason why you have certain things going on. All right. So let's look at a little study here that they did. And you could find these, I mean, there's tons of studies out there. This is off of PubMed. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, just, the title, Prevalence of IgG-Mediated Food Intolerances Among Patients with Allergic Reactions, allergic symptoms. So really you go down to the bottom where it says conclusion, right? The detection of a variety of food-specific IgG antibodies among patients with allergic symptoms is indicated a possible link to food intolerance allergies. Now, again, come back to me. It just always makes me laugh, right? Food intolerance is, they're allergies, right? Like just bottom line, right? They're food allergy. Just because you eat it and you don't die from it, or it doesn't cause your face to blow up or your throat to swell, doesn't mean it's not an allergy, right? And that's where they always try to use those interchangeable words. Well, it's intolerance, it's hypersensitivity, it's a sensitivity. No, right? It's an allergy, right? Just call it what it is. Either call them all hypersensitivities, call them all allergies. It doesn't matter. They're the same thing. It's just how those symptoms and what cells are used get manifested, right? And in the study, they only looked at like 70 people. I think it was 71 people, and every single one of them had some reaction, right? Every single one of them had some reaction when they come in contact with these IgG-mediated allergens. And so think about that. Multiply that to the population, people out there. I mean, every single one of us, as much as I hate to be the bearer of bad news, so hopefully you're sitting down Saturday morning, right? But we all have IgG allergies, right? Like, let me say it again. We all have IgG-based allergies. A very small percentage of people have IgEs, right? Which again is why it's good to know, but most people don't deal with that. Everybody has IgG allergies, and for everyone, if you're consuming and coming in contact with these triggers, it's going to be a player in a catalyst to the different symptoms and conditions you have going on. Some people have 30, 40, some people have 15, some people have 10, whatever it might be, but we all have them and they're all going to be a factor. Some people, they're way more a player in their health, but for others, they're going to be a contributing factor, right? And so what are some of the symptoms and things that we can see when you have these IgG-based allergies and you come in contact with them? Let's take a little look here, all right? A whole laundry list of things over there, right? From headaches, to diarrhea, to vomiting, to gas, to fatigue, bloating, mood changes, sinus issues, muscle aches and pains, low energy, fatigue, seizures, hyperactivity, anxiety, mood swings, itchy eyes, insomnia, cravings, weight gain, itchiness, hay fever, stuffy nose, poor concentration, right? Just to name a few of them. Right now, again, think about that, right? Now, if you're driving, hopefully you don't look at the screen, right? But if you're sitting at home and you're watching this, pop these up again, just look at those, right? Just take a second, go through those, and just sit there and think. I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people out there that are probably listening, watching the show today, probably deal with at least one, if not multiple different symptoms that are on there on probably a weekly basis, all right? And I always find interesting too, when you look at these symptoms, only a handful are really gut related. Right, that's another big thing I get. Flip back over to me here. Thank you. Right, that's another big thing that I get too is, well, doc, I eat these things and they're an allergy, right? But I don't have any symptoms, right? I don't have any gut. And when they tell me that, what they mean is they don't have a digestive related issue, right? They don't get gas or bloating or diarrhea or constipation or throw up, right? Well, when you look at that list, right, of symptoms that we just talked about, that's only a small percentage, right? When you look at the actual again, the research and the data out there, about 70% of the time when you come in contact with an IgG-based allergy, right, they say you're going to have extra intestinal manifestations 70% of the time, right? So what does that mean? It's just a very fancy word like the medicine likes to do to say you're going to have symptoms that aren't gut related. They're going to create something else, right? So when you look at those things, headaches, joint aches and pains, skin issues, brain fog, fatigue, anxiety, right? All these other issues and symptoms can be coming from a food allergen, right? An IgG-based allergy reaction that you're having just because you consume it or come in contact with it and it doesn't give you an upset stomach doesn't mean it's not creating an issue. And I always will sit down with patients and say, well, but don't you but you get headaches, right? Yeah. You have brain fog and fatigue, right? Yeah. You have skin issues, yeah. Joint pain, yeah. Right? You have high blood pressure or high blood sugar, yeah. Right? You're under a lot of mental stress, yeah. Right? So there's a lot of different other symptoms that these can cause and create, and again, why I recommend and preach so much about getting the food allergies tested, because it's a great way to look for these IgG triggers, but the only way you can do that is you have to look in the blood, right? A skin-based testing is only looking for one thing. It's only looking for IgE type reactions, right? Those anaphylactic type reactions. And like I said, most people don't have those, but everybody has these IgGs, and it's a matter of getting those things tested so now you can figure out what they are and start to remove them. And I guarantee you, if you do, right, you're going to see an improvement and reduction in your symptoms. Some things might totally go away, right? Some things might just improve, but you will see an improvement in overall health. Because why, right? They stimulate inflammation, they stimulate histamine, right? They create stress on all these other organs and tissues, which is going to create all these systemic issues, right? So let's take a little peek at here, because at the end of the day, right, I always say, what is it really, we're going to look at what can we do to actually reduce the risk of developing these allergies. Because let's understand this, is most of the reason why we have allergies, flip back over to me here real quick, thank you. Right, one of the reasons why we have allergies is because our immune systems and our guts are just, they're just destroyed, right? Most people's immune systems are in just disarray because of things that they've been put through as infants and child and teens and adults and now into their senior years, right? If you catch my drift, some medical interventions that create massive immune system dysfunction. Right? It puts you in this very high Th2 dominant state, which is where histamine lives and where antibody production lives and high inflammation lives, right? But also people's digestive tracts and their guts are they're just destroyed from stress, medications, antibiotic use, just a poor diet, our food supply being just littered with toxins and chemicals and herbicides and pesticides and fungicides and all these GMO-based things just destroy our gut health, right? And so when the immune system's all messed up, the gut's all messed up, that's a perfect storm to develop allergies and to push you even more into this high dominant allergic state. So when we look at this graphic here, right, just a little, again, clinical pearl, we're not meant to have proteins in our system, right? You're not meant to have proteins within the tissues. You're not meant to have proteins floating around in your blood, because what triggers an immune response is a foreign protein in the body, right? Just go back to the definition of an allergen. What is an allergen? It's a foreign protein that gets in the body. It doesn't matter if it's a virus or bacteria, if it's a food, plant, whatever. If it gets in there, it can stimulate an immune response, right? So for things to work, they're supposed to, the proteins we eat are to be broken down into amino acids by stomach acid. All right, flip back to me here. Yes, stomach acid. I think the stomach, when we look at our overall, again, medical system, and even when you kind of get into the functional, alternative medicine world, it gets often overlooked, and it sets the stage for so many aspects of our health. And one of the big things we need to be doing is making sure we're making stomach acid, because it does two things. Sterilizes your food, number one, all right? And number two, it starts to break those proteins down, all right? Flip back over here. So looking at this, right, your body is going to then break those proteins down into amino acids, right, which are the building blocks, right? Those amino acids then get absorbed, right? We call them the Legos, right, the building blocks. Those amino acids then get absorbed more downstream, and then your body takes those amino acids, right, and it builds them back up into proteins and delivers them across the body. So flip back over here. So understand if you can do things, and Dr. Jason actually talked a little bit about this last week too, if you can do things to build up those barriers, support good, healthy digestion, you can actually reduce your risk of developing allergies and improve them over time. Because yes, we were talking earlier with one of the soon-to-be docs here off screen before we jumped down. We were getting a little carried away, right? But we were talking about how so many things can affect your ability to develop allergies, from stress to maldigestion to getting other immune infections, autoimmune. There's so many other aspects that can affect it, but one thing that you can be doing that will greatly help reduce your risk of developing, and if you have a ton, can actually help bring those levels back down, is working on supporting good, healthy digestion and those barriers. Because, you know, in a perfect ideal world, if you had great immune system balance and function, you had perfect great liver function, you had perfect, you know, great balance in your gut bacteria and your microbiome, and you were producing digestive acids and enzymes perfectly, and you could break all those things down, we wouldn't develop allergies, right? The sad truth is that usually doesn't exist, because we've been exposed to so many different triggers and stressors throughout our life, and we just live in a world nowadays where we just have higher levels of stress, which are going to impact not just immune system function, but digestion, and that in itself is going to increase your risk of developing these food allergies down the road. All right, so from here, let's kind of move into our product knowledge and talk about a few things that you can do to help support good, healthy digestion. All right, hey, back again, right? I love the transitions. Still here, right? Still same spot. Cooking right along and getting into the product knowledge. So, like I mentioned, now last week, Dr. Jason talked about Albizia, I believe, and still, in my opinion, it's probably across the board the most common, popular herb that we pretty much recommend and give to patients day one to start. But again, why? Because like I mentioned, so many of us live in this type 2 immune response, high histamine world. Albizia is a great thing to add in, because what does it do? It binds to the mast cells, right? It stabilizes mast cells. It decreases the risk of the release of histamine, right? And it's those histamines that bind to the receptors and can create all these different symptoms. So it's a great thing to use to help reduce and stabilize the immune system and reduce the symptoms. But at the end of the day, Albizia, and it does great things it helps with the kidneys, it helps with liver function, it helps balance immune, it does a lot of other great things, right? But at the end of the day, it's still kind of just a Band-Aid to help offset symptoms until you go after and start to address why these allergies are developed in the first place, right? And that's where I kind of go into our product knowledge, you know, what to do, right? What can you do? So two things that I will commonly use, and I would say the vast majority of my patients are probably on them, especially this guy right here, Digest Well, right? So what is Digest Well? It's basically digestive acid, betaine, hydrochloric acid, and apple cider vinegar put in a capsule form, right? And as it states, it does a handful of different things. It encourages proper blood sugar regulation. It can regulate bacterial candida yeast overgrowth, and I'll even throw in parasites there, because that's something we'll talk a little bit about here in a little bit. Right? And then it normalizes stomach acid to improve reflux, heartburn, and GERD. Flip back to me. All right. So again, I can't tell you how many people, I would say probably 70 to 80% of the patients, when they come in and I sit down with them, it might not be the main reason they're there, right? But they have listed off, and I always go and look, heartburn, acid reflux, bloating, indigestion, burping after meals, right? Just feel full after meals, right? And you can go and we do, you know, x-rays are a great way to look for signs of inflammation. Look at their x-ray, their stomach's all blowing up, massively inflamed, right? This is a perfect place to start to add something like this in. Now again, you could do just apple cider vinegar, right? It's gonna accomplish very similar thing. Tablespoon, it'll be like the Bragg's apple cider vinegar. I always say it's the best, worst tasting one, right? Me personally, like, I just do not like the taste, the smell. Just reminds me of like dirty feet. I don't know what it is. Like, my wife uses it to like clean sometimes. I'm like, I'd rather you not clean the house, so now it smells like dirty feet, then just leave it as it is, right? Or maybe we need to switch it to something else, but I just can't stand the smell of it. But that's why, right? We developed it, and Doc put it in a capsule, because there's a lot of people like me out there that would rather spend a little bit more and take it in the capsule than just go to the store and drink it, right? But either way, it's going to accomplish the same thing, right? We're trying to stimulate that acid production, right? We're trying to build up those acid levels in the stomach. So something like this, whether it's apple cider vinegar or the capsule, right? I usually recommend doing, 1 to 2. If I have somebody who's got a really lot of issues, we'll do like a challenge where they just add 1 in at each meal until they get to a certain level, and then they start to back down, right? But you're gonna do it prior to meals, 10, 15 minutes before meals, and it's gonna help with that digestion. It's gonna help stimulate that acid production in there. And I will use it for a lot of other reasons. A very common thing we do, I do a lot of stool testing in the office as well. And I would say probably 80% of the people, when we do that, they come back with bacterial overgrowth. They come back with actual bacterial infections, yeast infections, or parasites. And a lot of times why those things can set up shop in there is because you lack stomach acid. All right, and again, remember, the number one job of the stomach is to produce acid, right? But what's the number one job of the acid? It's not to digest, it's to sterilize, right? It sterilizes the things that you put in there. Because yes, even though we live in America, our food is still dirty, right? There's still tons of stuff on it. We still have parasites and all these other things in this country, right? They're not just a third world country issue. So having those proper stomach acid levels really help to start to digest, break down, sterilize those things, and prevent them from not just being infections, but again, like I said, if you can break those proteins into those building blocks, those amino acids, it reduces the risk of them becoming an allergy. All right. And with that being said too, hun, if you're watching, I still love you, but maybe we can use a different cleaning product. Right? So don't yell at me when I get back home. All right. But the other thing we'll use, right, is Wellzyme, right? So now this is a common question, flip back to me here real quick, because this is a common question I get a lot of times too. When patients come in, they'll say, well, I'm taking a digestive enzyme. Is that the same? No, those are two different things, right? Our Wellzymes, or any type of enzyme, those are digestive enzymes. Those are different than adding in an apple cider vinegar, a Digestwell, a betaine hydrochloric acid. That's more acidic, right? Now, again, you need that acid to help break proteins down and sterilize. You need to have a very acidic stomach to absorb certain minerals, right? That's why a lot of people are deficient in their minerals, because they just don't produce stomach acid because of stress and infections and whatever else. You need to absorb certain vitamins as well. But then the enzymes, right, can be a nice additional piece to add in, because it helps and assists with further breakdown of those proteins, peptides, fats, and sugars and fibers within the diet, right? And it enhances absorption, as it says, as vitamins and minerals. So many people, flip back over to me here, so many people are deficient, all right, in vitamins and minerals. Part of it is because probably their diet and they just don't eat enough. But the other part is you can eat all the greatest, awesome, amazing foods, but if you can't digest and absorb them and you don't have the things you need to absorb those nutrients, it doesn't matter, right? And that's the other case for a lot of people, is they're doing and they're eating the right things, right? So they think, and we'll talk about the food allergy tests here in a sec, right? But they lack the mineral, they lack the enzymes and things needed to digest and absorb those. So again, this is a common thing that I will use with patients. Usually, I'll add it in after looking at a stool test if they have low levels of enzymes being produced, if they have some of those symptoms of protein maldigestion, so they don't like to eat meat, they get a lot of bloating with meat, they don't digest it very good, they kind of tend to shy away from it just because they don't feel good when they eat it. I'm usually adding in some type of digestive acid, the Digestwell, and I'm usually adding in some enzymes to help support. And kind of, again, little clinical pearl, overlooked fact, is your pancreas plays a much, much, much bigger role in digestion than it does in actually even blood sugar regulation, right? I think the pancreas, the majority of the cells in the pancreas are dedicated to enzyme production. It produces about 8 cups of enzymes a day. So the pancreas has a huge role in digestive functions and things. And so if you're dealing with blood sugar issues and even like fatty liver and things like that, that can put a lot of stress on the pancreas and then affect digestion as well, all right? So those are two things, that you can use and add in to help support and reduce the risk of developing food allergies, using it with Allergies to help shut symptoms down. But this is going to start to go after some of those underlying reasons of why you might be developing allergies in the first place. If you're not breaking things down, you don't have good barriers, you don't have a lot of stomach acid, it's going to make you susceptible to all sorts of environmental triggers and toxins out there. All right, so those are things you can add in to help support. And so from there, we're going to transition into our hot topic, talk about a couple things, and then we'll wrap up. All right. Part 3, hot topics, right? Selected by or picked by patients. I don't know if the patients picked this, but I will say it is a very common question, again, I get because we talk so much about food allergy testing, right? And in my opinion, I think it's a great place for people to start, especially this month if we're going to talk about allergies and you're sitting at home and maybe some of the things I kind of resonate with you that I've said, some of the things I'm talking about, like, well, yeah, I deal with that. I have those kind of symptoms. Some of the things that I tossed up on the symptom list before, yeah, those are all things I deal with. Well, where's the place you can start, right? I think a food allergy test for us, in my opinion, is a great place to start. So here's an example of one, right? This is just share a quick little patient story. It's a patient that came in that was dealing with tons of digestive issues, a lot of skin problems, joint aches and pains, brain fog, fatigue. So one of the things we did, and where I typically start, is ran a food allergy test, right? And so looking at this, you have things that are red and you have things that are blue. Now, as I always tell people, things down in the blue means that they're non-reactive. Doesn't always mean they're a great food, just means that, hey, here's things that we can start to focus on that aren't going to trigger more of that immune system. And then you have the stuff that's in the red. And when you look at some of those things like crab and cranberry and kale and lettuce, right, chia, hemp, tomato, sesame, watermelon, right, flip back to me here, right? When you look at those things, it's like, man, those aren't, really, those aren't bad foods, right? And no, I wouldn't say those are a bad food. They're just not good for that person, right? And that's why I always tell people is you can be doing all the right things in your diet. You can be cutting out all the processed foods and eating all the whole-based foods and things like that. But even if it's a great, awesome, amazing, healthy food, but you're eating it every day and your body's allergic to it or viewing it as an allergen or potential trigger, it's still going to create a problem. Well, what if I do organic versions? Yeah, we always joke and say, well, do you want to be organically sick, right? Doesn't make a difference, right? It's still going to trigger a response in the body, right? And flip back over here too. There's numbers there, right? Might be kind of hard to see, but there's 1s, 2s, 3s, and potentially a 4. This person doesn't have it. But again, a lot of times, flip back to me here, people will say, well, when and if they get the test, well, I've been cutting out my 2s and 3s and 4s, but I still have my 1s a little bit here and there, right? The number doesn't mean severity. It just means how many antibodies are present, right? Regardless, if it's red and you want to start to reduce histamine inflammation, start to get the body on that healing path, that restoration path, you got to start to cut those things out. Now, does that mean you have to avoid these things for the rest of your life? No, because very often we will retest these, and over time, especially if you start off with a higher number, they can come down, right? Not always, right? But we'll show you an example here. But I always tell people there's so many things that can affect your food allergies too. You're going through a stressful time in life, that can affect it, right? You get sick with some types of infections, that can affect it, right? But if you're working on building up those good barriers, doing things that help support and balance your immune system, working on keeping your stress levels low, right? Those are all things that you need to be doing so you can actually reduce the risk of developing new food allergies and bring them down over time, right? And those are things that we worked on with this patient. So if you flip back here, we retested these about 9 months to a year later, right? And he went from 22 down to 9. Now, like I said, is it always that massive of a drastic change? Not always. Sometimes you go from 22 to 20, right? But if you're working on avoiding them, you're staying away from them, you're working on building up those barriers, managing your stress, and other things that are going to lead to those allergies being triggered, right? It will very commonly be able to reduce the amount that are there, and you can start to add some of these things back into the system. But the food allergy test is something that I usually recommend everybody do on a periodic basis, once every year, year and a half, 2 years, depending on how long you've been a part of the Wellness Way and what you've all been working on, because they can and will change over time. And it's a way for you to identify potential triggers that you can now switch, move, and pull out before you develop these chronic inflammatory conditions. All right. Another thing too, I didn't throw this up here, but they also test for IgE. We test for 8 IgE allergies. This particular patient didn't have any. But again, and it's very common, it's very uncommon for me to find them, but when they do show up, right, especially I've had patients where, they'll have 4, 5, 6. I've had patients where they've had all 8 show up, and then they do the expanded panel and they get like another 20 that show up, right? When I start to think about all these high levels of IgE food allergies, what my first thought really comes back to gut health and potential parasites, because there's 2 things that will stimulate IgE production: allergies and parasites. And more often than not, the reason why you have a bunch of IgE allergies is because you got a bunch of parasites going on. And if you can, and in my experience, clean up the gut, clean up those infections, clean up those parasites, a lot of those IgE allergies and allergies in general will start to come down, because now you remove that triggering stressor to the body. All right? So with that being said, let's move into the last 10% and we'll wrap up here. All right, last 10%. So a couple things. One, I just want to say again, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor being here and chatting with you, and hopefully you found some value in some of the things that we've gone over today. Hopefully you've learned something a little bit new and different. Hopefully you're thinking a little bit different about health and healthcare and how you can manage your health. But one thing I want to hit on again just comes back to the beginning, right? If there's one thing that I can hope you take out of this, is understand that allergies are hypersensitivities and hypersensitivities are allergies, right? There's 4 different types, right? And what can classify the type of hypersensitivity or allergic reaction you have is going to be based on the cells that are used and what's being produced, right? But they're all going to create inflammation. They're all going to drive histamine. They can just create different symptoms, but they can be a massive, massive contributing factor to why you have the different things going on. And so a question I get very often is, you know, doc, if there's one test, right? If you could say, maybe I don't have a ton of money, you know, I just want to start somewhere. I don't want to be super overwhelmed. I don't want to run 5 different things. I just want to start my road to wellness, right? I just want to get on the path of healing and restoration. What's one thing, testing-wise, that you would recommend? Very often, I come back to the food allergy test, right? And why I come back to that just goes back to some of the things I was saying earlier, is that those IgG-based allergies, right, they create so many different symptoms. They create systemic inflammation. They create systemic histamine release, which then drives and creates stress on the hormones and stress on the adrenals and stress on the nervous system, right? They can create so many things. And I find that when people just start there, and if now, right, the key is then they actually take action, right, and they start to remove those allergies from their diet, whether it's something they're eating, something they're drinking, a product and cosmetic you're using, anything that you're going to be putting on or coming in contact with your body, you got to make sure you're staying away from those things. And I find that people see massive improvements in their overall health. Sometimes their symptoms go away, sometimes some things go away and other things improve, right? But I can guarantee you this, by doing that one thing, you will, and you actually follow it, you will start to see your symptoms and your overall health and improve. And then sometimes, for some people, yes, you need to dig a little bit further. We need to do a little bit more to get that full healing and restoration, but it's a great place to start. It's a simple thing to do. It's a simple blood test. Again, you can find a wellness way near you or reach out. You know, pretty much any and every clinic would be able to get you set up with that. And so, like I said, if you're looking for a simple place to start, you're looking for your ability to get on your road to wellness and your path to healing, because we always say, right, we're your tour guide. It's our job to sit down with you. It's our job to give you recommendations. It's our job to give you the information. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what you want to do with that information, right? But a simple place, a simple first step is start with the food allergy test and then actually eliminating and pulling those things out. I guarantee you will see some improvement. There may be more that needs to be done, but it's a great place to start. And so I just want to say again, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a great opportunity. And in the words of our lovely office staff, Shara, hopefully in the future, God willing, right, I'll be able to sit down and chat with you guys again soon. Have a great weekend, a great Saturday, and have an awesome Easter.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video or live stream.
Each week on A Different Perspective, we bring you the most cutting-edge information on health you won't find anywhere else. For more information on this topic, please visit our website. A Different Perspective offers life-changing information and resources to share and explore. A Different Perspective is leading a health revolution.